Good morning. I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, What to Look For when Establishing a Nearshore Platform to Become Part of Your Global Delivery Strategy. My name is Katie Bennett, and I'm a Project Manager for the Outsourcing Institute. It is our pleasure to be the co-host of today's event. I'll be working in the background to help answer any technical or general questions that you may have. But before we begin, I'd like to quickly tell you about a few of the tools that you'll be able to use throughout today's session. First, we want to encourage you at any time during the presentation to submit your questions to our speakers. To do this, please click on the questions box, type your question in the space provided, and click on the submit button. We will also be asking you poll questions to get to know you better and to help ensure that the content is relevant to your specific needs. When a poll appears, be sure to select the answer that best fits each question. I am now going to turn this over to Frank Casal, founder and CEO of the Outsourcing Institute. Frank?
Great. Thanks, Katie, and thanks for always doing such a great job with these webinars. I know there's a lot of work behind the scenes. So welcome to each of you here for today's presentation and discussion. For OI members, I'd like to say hello and welcome again. Many of you are fairly active as far as attending our webinars, and for those of you who possibly are not yet OI members, who may have just surfed on the internet and found us at outsourcing.com, welcome as well, and hopefully you will find this as time well spent. Today's presentation really addresses two topics that are getting a lot of attention within our global membership network, one being nearshore outsourcing, and the other being outsourcing to Brazil. As to why nearshore, I don't want to steal too much of the thunder, but I will say a lot of it has to do with items such as risk mitigation, portfolio diversification, time and proximity, and we will get more into that as we get into the presentation. As to why Brazil, we have many reasons, and we're going to share them with you throughout the discussion as well. Before I pass the baton here, I wanted to thank Robert Jansen and his team for sponsoring this webinar, making it possible. That's how we're able to deliver it to you. I wanted to introduce Robert as a member and a very active supporter of the Outsourcing Institute. Robert's managing partner at Outsource Brazil, which is an advisory company. And Robert also manages Brazilian government's export promotion program, which is Brazil IT, advising on the Brazil IT services. So he's one of our go-to guys for this space, and which is why we're pleased to have him here. I want to pass the ball to you, Robert, in a moment, and have you talk about what we're going to really discuss in the next 50-some-odd minutes. But before I do that, I want to encourage those of you in attendance to key in a question, as Katie mentioned at the outset. No need to wait till the end. Robert and I have agreed we want to make this an interactive discussion. So if you have a question, a comment, a thought, feel free to key it in into the area on your screen, hopefully if you're sitting in front of a computer. That said, Robert, look forward to a good discussion. I'm going to pass it to you.
Thank you very much, Frank. I welcome everyone, too, that's listening to us today. I want to thank our Outsourcing Institute for also being a great partner in allowing us to showcase not only our expertise, but also the destination for Brazil. And I also want to thank Jacques Depoca, who was our other panelist, who is a very highly regarded professional in the outsourcing space, has great experience, has lived in many different walks of the life around the world, and currently now he holds court in Curitiba. He's the CEO of GLT, which is HSBC Bank's Global Delivery Center. Before I pass on to Jacques and let him talk about a little bit of what his experience is and we move into the webinar, I'd like to just to clarify to our audience that Brazil IT is just basically a corporate identity. It's a brand name in which the Brazilian government showcases the best-of-breed Brazilian IT companies in all different markets they are targeting. So basically, it's an overall umbrella. sometimes people come up to us and say, how can I hire Brazil IT? Brazil IT is not for hire. It's actually just a corporate brand name. And then in Outsource Brazil, the company I'm a managing partner of is an advising company and helping organizations understand how to best find a fit for their needs in the Brazilian outsourcing space. So moving on, Jacques Depoca from HSBC Bank, GLT CEO. Jacques, thank you for being on board. Please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm pleased to be part of this webinar. I'm the center head of Global Technology in Brazil. Global Technology is the offshoring operation of the HSBC Group. The group has more than 330,000 employees worldwide, of which 33,000 work in IT. Of those 33,000, more than 8,000 are in offshore centers, which we call GLTs. GL for Global and T for Technology. We have GLTs in India, in the cities of Pune and Hyderabad, and they total almost 6,000 employees. We have another GLT center in China, in Guangzhou, with almost 2,300 people. And in Brazil, I set up the operation in 2006, and today we have 400 employees. The objective of the HSBC Group is to reduce its IT costs by offshoring development work to low-cost countries. And that's why today, for example, GLT Brazil works for the IT from the US, Canada, UK, France, Hong Kong, and we help our customers reduce their costs by supplying talented resources from Brazil. Okay?
All right, thank you very much, Jacques. And if I ask Katie, please go to slide 4, and where our purpose today is to be able to showcase to you what is the best practices used by most top-notch organizations around the world. We're looking to establish a global delivery center, and we want to put that within the context of Nearshore. And so we're normally looking at the different, very important variables in which companies need to understand and feel confident for a common standard operating environment. And standardization is a big issue when you're talking about having different global delivery centers scattered around the world. The enterprise architecture, having consistent tools and processes across the board. The management into which the enterprise is actually administered. All of the applications that will give support and are running on top of the infrastructure. And at the end, the business processes which have to do with the business outcome. Moving on to slide 5, Katie, you will see here that what we're looking in this context of a global delivery strategy is to showcase it to you in nearshore context, where time zone proximity is now considered to be a very key success factor in several types of different IT engagements and projects. A lot when you're talking about application maintenance or infrastructure or remote management. Normally issues and projects that need that you be really close and where you can have a better control and better supervision. And it is also being known now that the fact that you're choosing to be nearshore, it does not have such a high direct impact on cost. Because if you are to count in other costs that normally are not considered at the beginning of projects of these places that we call far shore, normally people don't count in the travel costs, the time hours that are usually used to manage that project from far shore at the very wee hours of the morning and so forth. But so moving on to slide 6, Katie.
Robert, is this a bad time to interject with a question? Because
no, absolutely not.
There are many people on the call that may want to address the price point. The conversation I've typically had when I'm speaking with members or people out there in the industry is when they think of any nearshore destination, and certainly in this case, we're talking about Brazil. The conversation typically centers around, well, hey, the good news is this is a great destination. You have to be willing to, give up a couple of points on the cost save. So what you're saying is that is not necessarily the case.
Yeah, well, typically people, they don't count in things that they don't know. And when they're going into a situation and trying to manage a team out in Pakistan, for instance, they don't realize that they're going to have to be waking up several times at 4 o'clock in the morning in order to manage that project. Well, those times, those hours spent at 4 o'clock in the morning and the cost of opportunity are not counted in. Sometimes you have to fly over there and to be able to have hands-on on the process, and sometimes that's not counted in as well. So these issues in which are not considered at the beginning and are not actually factored into the cost, if you do factor it into the cost, you'll find that possibly you're looking at what we call a wash compared to the fact that you here are closer to your project, you're closer to the people, and the fact that you're not having to fly across different time zones, the fact that you're not getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning to manage the project, it is also allowing you to take care of other things, which we call the opportunity cost. So we like normally say it's minimally a wash.
Yeah.
John?
Can I add something?
Yes, please, John.
From my experience, at GLT, is that you can not only look at the rate that you pay per hour for the resource. Brazil is more expensive than India or China, but you do save money in the sense that the management, the effort is a lot lower. For example, it's typical for Indian offshoring companies to have 10% of the staff onshore with the customer, which increases the cost because you have to pay for the accommodation, for travel, for visas, for insurance, for the daily allowance. And for example, my situation here in Brazil, thanks to the maturity and the quality of the resources, we do not need to have a Brazilian resource onshore with the customer. I don't have anyone. I'm 100% offshore with very mature staff, and our customers agree with us that it's easier to run an offshore operation with us because we have people that are self-motivated, proactive, and know what they're doing. So they think that the cost of managing the offshore process is a lot lower with a lot less effort, and that's one of the benefits, even though my cost per hour is higher than what India or China charges.
Okay, great. Well, that's significant. I'm curious to see a little bit later as we get deeper into the story and just discussions with those in attendance here, just to compare and contrast stories. But that is a really good point. What we're hearing more and more in general with outsourcing is as you're sizing this up from the standpoint of a spreadsheet and a calculator, think total cost, right? It's not just about the rate.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, so moving forward, a global delivery strategy. Before we get specific into Nearshore, I'd like just to give the context of what one considers in a global delivery strategy. And normally that's divided up in three different categories, and where you have global service centers, you have regional service centers, and client capability specific. We will go into a little bit of each one of them, and then we're going to be working with the regional service center as being equivalent to what we would do for establishing a nearshore platform. But before we do that, I'd like to ask Katie so we could actually post the first polling question to our audience.
Our first polling question is, what is the principal business expertise your current projects require? Responses are banking and finance or insurance, telecommunications, manufacturing, pharmaceutical, or energy, oil, and gas. We'll give you just a few moments to respond, and then we'll get back to the presentation.
I think we're ready to move, Katie.
All right. There's your results.
Very good. Okay, moving on to slide 7. So here, what we're trying to do is just to give you a little bit of background and how a global service center is perceived. You here on the left-hand side have just a slide. So as you look at a question of a global service center, is normally a network strategic position for providing core services, and it's integrated across a service delivery portfolio for the whole organization. And normally, as Jacques was saying, this is positioned in places where you have a very strong labor pool to supply and to be able to support all the service lines that any organization has. And we're talking about supplying a possibility of operating into multiple shifts, a possibility of supporting a 24/7 operation. Jacques, tell me, the HSBC, as I understand, you are able from your GLT operation actually to service several different regions around the world, correct?
Yes, today we're a complete IT operation, so we do everything from software development to IT operations to application support, as well as information security, IT security. And we work for the whole group, and we do have some projects that we share with the GLT in China, thanks to the 12-hour time difference between both centers. And so we were getting, for example, application support, follow the sun, where Brazil works 12 hours a day and China picks up the other 12 hours.
Great. Yeah, you also mentioned in a conversation we had earlier about the fact that because of your operation with GLT in Brazil, you can actually work with any project without having to assign an onshore team. That it's 100% is done out of Curitiba.
Yeah, that's our model. I think thanks to the talent and the quality of the staff we have here, and I think to the good communication skills that Brazilians have and the way that they are successful in relating with other people from other cultures and other nationalities, we have been able to build team extensions where the people in Brazil are considered as part of the team of the customer wherever he is. So there's a very good open flow of communication which permits us to work 100% offshore.
Okay. And I'd like also to have you comment on the fact that the deployment of GLT in Curitiba actually had you take less time than it was expected, and it was much lesser than it would happen in other regions such as China.
Yes, we started operation in 2006, and I think the proof of the good results is that we have an annual customer survey that's done every year. And the rating goes from 1 to 5, 1 being excellent and 5 being very poor. And in the first global customer survey that we participated in 2007, Brazil came out ranked ahead of India and China. So we got a better customer rating than the other centers, which showed that they were more satisfied with the work we were doing for them, which was a surprise for a lot of people. Being a young operation compared to India that started in 2002, and China that has been in operation since 2004. So we went up the maturity, very, very quickly.
Okay, very good. Katie, can we move on to slide 8? And we'll just showcase here we're looking at what the regional service center basically is exactly where we are going to be contexting this for a Nearshore platform and showing you, the audience, what is the common selection criteria used by many organizations when they're looking to establish a regional service center, and we're lending that into a Nearshore platform, where typically you do have still the low-cost, high-quality relative questions that you need to address. Also the capacity expansion which you need. And like I believe, Jacques, that when you came in with HSBC, you had a goal of establishing a certain number of headcounts, and then you also have the challenge of then expanding that headcount within the next couple of years. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, the initial plan was to start with 200 people, that we reached at the end of mid-2007. And today we're with 400, but we have a plan that we will probably grow up to 1,000 staff in the next 2 to 3 years.
Very good. Katie, please move on to slide 9. And client capability specific, where it focuses really on supporting a specific and a unique capability, where you're talking about situations in which the client has to be in a certain area because that area, that region, has the expertise needed for the type of service he needs to provide to their customer base. But we want to look today more at the regional service centers in the Nearshore platform context. And I'm asking Katie to move again on to slide number 10. And here, so for this presentation, what we have done is that we have compiled the best practices used by many research institutes and in their consulting endeavors to their organizations that are their clients, and how to establish a selection criteria for establishing a regional center or a nearshore platform. Slide 11, please. So what we're saying that there is a process in which it's pretty much a statistical analysis that you perform first before you get into a deep discussion. So you go through a broader list of locations and cities, and then you move on to a shorter list. The broader list, you actually have a statistical analysis, so you can actually funnel down into those that really match those core competencies and those critical success factors according to your need. And then when you have your short list, you move on to a negotiation phase. Moving on to slide 12, we'll see that we say there are 4 phases, and a lot of the phases, the phases independently will always be looking at 4 critical issues. Stable, dependable workforce, that's very key. Like Jacques mentioned, they did not know that at the start, but they found out that just because of the business expertise on the ground that they found in Brazil and Curitiba, they were actually able to come ahead of other global centers for the same client. It's high quality. Security and privacy, and here is in the context also of public safety and IP protection. And of course, at the end of the day, cost competitiveness has always been a big factor for everyone. So site selection is divided in 4 phases. You go through country first, and then in the country you look to choose 10 to 15 cities. And only after you're really down to a short list and you define your country will you go into the 3rd and 4th phase. If you move into the next slide, Katie. And please, Frank and Jacques, if you like to also bring in something that you have experienced, please do interject. So before you carry out the 4 phases, one thing that's found by all of these best practices is that you need to establish a team on the ground. And someone has to have the ownership of this process. And this team that has the ownership should be comprised of different types of people. People that are involved directly with the technology resources, people that are involved with the HR resources, and people that also understand the dynamics of negotiation and being able to establish infrastructure. So we have found that many organizations have failed in setting up a delivery center somewhere else because they did not really assign ownership to the right people that could be really the deliverers of those key processes that need to be in place when a delivery center is set up. So before we move, Katie, we're going to move on to our second polling question, please.
All right, our second polling question is, what are the types of outsourcing projects your company would provide through an outsourced development center? Custom application development, application maintenance, legacy transformation and migration, enterprise systems integration, or software testing. Okay. Here are your results.
Okay. Thank you, Katie. So moving to slide 14, this is just an overall graph in which now we're trying to assign weights, percentages to different items in a selection process, moving from country, then into city, and then when you really go into your short list, you'll be timing where you're going to have what we call the socialized selection and the selection negotiation. But based on a country selection, there's several different things that come into play. They are normally divided into two broader categories, one being the financial and the other one being the environmental. In environmental, you're looking at infrastructure, you're looking at political risks, you're looking at business risks, labor availability is also a very key issue, but also even weather issues, like what you call the natural disaster hazard risk is also taken into consideration. And the financial score, of course, you're looking at a very key cost elements. So it's real estate cost, labor cost, and even how stable the economy is. Because if you're living in an economy that it's not completely stable, you have inflation considerations, you have exchange rates considerations. And the other issue also is what is the fiscal framework, or what is the taxes that are actually affecting the outcome of your final cost. In the city selection, once you have selected a country, you want to look at their 10 top, 10 to 15, we say that probably you most likely want to actually have a probable number, a lower number than 10 and 15. This is just what the best practices that we have picked up from the different research institutes have showed us. But handling a lot of information for too many cities sometimes can get tricky. But first of all, when you look at cities, you're looking at really a quality of life. You're looking at the appropriate security levels, public safety. And then immediately after you got over that hurdle, then you want to look directly into what ties your project, your business, into the local labor pool availability when you're talking about BPO, YTO, and so forth. And then cost competitive cities. There's several different implications, and many cities around the world have discovered that they have to be more aggressive, proactive in providing the proper attractiveness for companies to set up their shops there. And that means tax incentives, that means sometimes even real estate grants, and so forth. Moving to then when you have defined your short list, you will also be then looking into real estate negotiation. You'll be looking into how I am going to actually deploy a first team and staff. And you also will be looking when you're going into selection negotiation, the capacity management, where are we going to be able to sit down and really perhaps sit with the mayorship, the city hall, and finalize a deal in which we can have a commitment from them as public policy for always maintaining that labor level that we need, incentives that are not going to be just a front-end entry, but they will have a lifetime throughout a medium to long-term cycle. And also real estate in which yes, we are coming in with this particular size and frame of mind, but we will need to expand, so we need to have also the visibility that expansion in real estate will not be an issue. I want to move to slide 15.
Robert, if I may, this is Frank. A couple of questions came in just from our attendees.
Yes.
And no surprises, several of them are pricing specific. So one I'd like to ask Jacques, and maybe you can comment on as well. But this question here, Jacques, has to do with just cost, if you will. And the question is as follows. We talked before about total cost of outsourcing. The question is, would a client see that total cost wash, if you will, in the billing? And if not, if it doesn't wash in the billing, how do you communicate that when up against an Indian competitor? Does that question make sense, Jacques? Do you understand that?
Yes, it does. I think when you look at the cost of running an offshore project, you take into account a lot of different aspects. One of them, I think, would be the startup. When you start a new engagement, it's the best way to start a new engagement is you have to send the offshore resources onshore to be trained by the onshore team and to get to know the team so that they have a better working relationship going forward. When we started GLT Brazil in 2006, the reference was India. So a lot of our first customers, for example, in the UK, would tell us that they wanted our professionals to spend 4 months in the UK for training before they could come back to Brazil and really start working effectively, because that was their experience with India. And we told them that we felt that 4 months was too long, that was not that necessary, but we originally said, okay, we'll send them for 4 months. In all the cases, our resources were back in Brazil after 6 weeks. Okay, due to the fact that I think they have more experience. I think that if you look at the maturity level in Brazil, it's very, very high. And that makes a difference when you have to train them, because the person already comes with a lot of prior work experience. So you don't have to invest so much in training the person. So the customers, in 6 weeks, they had someone that was operational and productive. So they saved a lot of money on accommodation, on daily allowance, and travel due to that fact. Another thing that our customers now, after 3 years of working with us, take into consideration is the attrition rate. The attrition rate in Brazil is very low. Brazilians think long term. They want to make a career with a company. So we never had a case where our customer invested in training our resource on site for the 6 weeks or 2 months, and when they come back, they quit and go and work for a competitor. That is very frequent in India, where customers have complained to me that they spent money investing training these people, and as soon as they get back to India, they update their CVs and get a better job somewhere else. So all that investment is lost for the customer. That, touching wood, has not happened with us, so our customers get a good payback on their investment. And then they find that the maturity level and the professionalism also makes a difference, so our staff here knows what to do, and they do it. They're proactive. They come back with solutions. They like to ask questions, and they also come up with good solutions to problems that they face. So I think all that makes it that it's a very good experience for the customer. Today, just for you to know, I charge 30% more than India. So in a month, it's around $1,200 a month more per resource, but none of my customers complain about that. So I think they see the value, and they're willing to pay more for a Brazilian resource than for someone from India or China. I hope that answered your question.
It did. I want to just play off of that for a moment, though, is how much either education or arm wrestling was required for them to get the value, if you will, that additional $1,200?
Well, the thing is that we started in 2006, the rule of the game, because we were the new players, I charged the same rate as India. In 2006, 2007, 2008. Because we had to get our foot inside the door and get, I think, the customers to know us and to understand what we were about. And then in January of this year, that's when we increased the rate due to various reasons. One was the dollar exchange rate, which was really hitting us hard, and the cost of Brazil, which is higher than in India. But not one of our customers canceled the engagement. Not one of them complained about it, because they saw the value of working with us, and they like working with us, and they want to continue working with us. And another thing I'd like to add is that if you look at the level of experience in Brazil, I think that's one of the big differences we have with other countries, is that in Brazil people start working very early. Okay, my average age today is 27 years old, and the average experience for associate is more than 7 years. Okay, so that means that the people started working when they're 18 years old. And in Brazil, it's very common that you work to pay for your university and you go to night school. So the university campuses in Brazil are empty during the daytime and they fill up in the evening because most people study at night. So when you compare a 25-year-old Brazilian with a 25-year-old Chinese or a 25-year-old Indian, don't be surprised that the Brazilian has been working for 7 years. So he has, I think, a lot more maturity, much more experience that he can bring to the table and help contribute to your project. While an Indian and a Chinese will have studied full time until they graduate and start working after they graduate from university. So that's when they're still learning, and that's why you have to invest a lot more in teaching them how to work. And so that's one of the differences that we've shown to our customers.
That's
Yeah, I'd like to
interesting.
add there. Yeah.
Please,
Yeah, I'd
Robert,
like to
go
add,
ahead.
yeah. What Jacques is saying, it also has a very big cultural element here. If you look at the way Brazilian people were actually raised within their culture and how they were colonized, they from the very start had to be go-getters, had to find different ways of getting things accomplished. They could not just sit still and wait for things to happen. So they, from very early age, had become known to be very proactive. And this is pretty much embedded in our culture, in the way that Brazilian people actually portray themselves. And when you compare to these other different regions, what you see there is a more rigid, more traditional, more conservative type of culture in which people are really aligned and they're very, I would say, tied to a certain dogma within their cultures. And the Brazilian culture is totally different. They are go-getters from the start. They'll always try to find a different way to get things done, and they're very proactive. This is why we say that normally you'll have a great opportunity cost savings when you're working with Brazilian people because they'll be able to deliver in a shorter period of time.
Excellent. I have another question. Maybe I'll steer this towards you, Robert. The question had to do with more pricing or relative to some of the other countries in Latin America, say Argentina, Colombia, etc. I think there's the Argentina, Colombia, Mexico. Would you like to comment on costs, pricing relative to some of these other destinations?
Yes. Typically, we're going to find that these other regions are very competitive from the pricing standpoint. Sometimes they will actually fare better. But then we come back again to some of the things that Jacques was saying. These other countries, they economically are not diversely developed as Brazil is. Brazil has over 50 strong different economic sectors. Few people know that Brazil manufactures airplanes, they manufacture agricultural vehicles, besides being a big commodity exporter. So by having these strong economic sectors, people can just hit the ground running for projects because they know what they're developing for, because they're also consumers and they're also users within that environment. When you go to these other regions, you may have a better pricing strategy there or a better price per hour. But the bottom line is that you're going to be working with a team in which they will have to acquire the business expertise to which they are working for because they don't experience that on a daily basis. So typically what we see is, yes, you might find a little bit of a better pricing, but when you look at the time frame in which that project will be deployed, at the end you'll compare the times and you'll see that, oh, I did this here in 3 months and did that there in 5 months. So what's the value of having 2 months free to be able to do something else? That has obviously a big economic impact.
So again, we're back to total cost and knowing the entire formula, if you will.
Yes, yes. I think this is what we need to really advocate because the bottom line is at the end of the project, you do have a final total cost impact, and it cannot be just overlooked. Typically, when people are looking to set up a new vendor, they're looking at the immediate costs that they see, but they're not considering the things that they don't see. And if they factor those in at the end of the project, they'll find out that, wow, it came much, much greater than I thought it would in the beginning.
Great. Thank you, Robert.
Okay. So we were at slide 15. Slide 15 actually was what I had just described from the graph on slide 14. So Katie, we could move to slide 16. And so, as I was mentioning during the phase one, we're really looking at countries. So taking a little bit what Frank was just saying, we're going to actually look at Argentina, we're going to look at Colombia, we're going to look at Brazil, and we're going to look at Costa Rica or Mexico. And then we're going to try to factor those things that are really important as far as the destination is concerned. So you're going to look at the overall political stability, you're going to look at the overall public safety, and you look at the IP rules and enforcement in those countries. Moving on to slide 17. Okay, yeah. This is the actual overall graph in which I was mentioning before, the two broader categories, the environmental score and financial score. So on the environmental score, you can be looking at the overall infrastructure that a country offers, what are the political risks, what are the business risks. And here the business risk is something that has to be looked carefully because different countries have different labor laws. Brazil has a very complex labor law, and sometimes it, at the beginning of the project, may look disfavorable, but at the overall, it's easy to work with. Then you look at labor availability. Of course, this is very important when you're looking with a project that has a need of scalability in the near term, medium term. And you also look at weather issues. You don't want to be in areas in which there is a natural hazard risk, because all of a sudden you can find, all of that investment that you have put in scrambles. Financial score, of course, it has a big bearing. So you have the real estate and cost and the labor cost. And you're also looking how costly is that infrastructure that is provided. And then you're looking at inflation, exchange rates, and country taxes. So this is like a one-shot, one-page view of all the items that you're going to be looking at when you're doing a country analysis. Moving to slide 18. Once the scores are calculated, so they're actually matched once another, there will be a chart that will be showing to you. But before we do that, I'm going to ask my dear friend Katie to go through polling question 3, please.
Okay, and polling question 3 is, what are the main selection criteria for choosing outsourcing vendors? Industry-specific business domain knowledge or technical expertise, competitive pricing, certification, geographical proximity, or cultural compatibility. All right, we'll give you just a few more seconds to get your selections in. And there's your results.
Yeah. Okay, moving to slide 19. So this is an analysis that was conducted by one of the big organizations, and we're not allowed actually to disclose. But this was a result in which they were looking at a frame of high risk and low risk with against high cost and low cost. So when you're looking at low cost, you see that there is also there's a not too much difference anymore between India, China, Romania, Brazil, Mexico, or Argentina, and you see some new players actually gravitating around now, which are in the yellow color, like Poland, Bulgaria, Egypt, and so forth. But our focus here is actually the red dots, in which we're trying to showcase Nearshore platform. So when you look at the cost competitiveness taken from the last poll, we can see from this slide that these nearshore locations fare pretty well against the known players like India and China. Moving on to the next slide, Katie. And we'll probably have to just rush up a bit here because we're up to the hour, and we want to make sure the audience gets to see everything. So what we're looking in the first circle of that slide is where there's a mature market group, established destination that have been already on the ground for a long time. And we have the second group, which is the emerging market group in the green circle, and where cost of business is normally significantly lower. Sometimes you have a higher risk involved. Sometimes you have a political issue, and this just depends what type of risk appetite each different organization has or not. Moving on to the next slide, Katie. So we're going to go into the city selection phase, and the city selection phase is where you start really honing down on specific things that can affect your project, can affect your team that's going to be on the ground. And I know that Jacques, they've inherited their city location from the purchase that HSBC Bank did on Palmeirindos Bank in Curitiba. But I know that he has a lot of experience around the world, and I'd like him to comment on what he has found in Curitiba. Jacques?
Okay, well, just before I'd like to maybe comment on the fact that the country location, HSBC has operations in today in more than 80 countries worldwide. And we have 14 major IT departments in 14 countries. So when we started looking outside of Asia to set up the third Global Technology Center, and we looked at Mexico, Argentina, Chile, Brazil, Panama, and our IT here internally ranks the countries, depending on risk and also the quality of the resources. And among the Latin American IT departments, the Brazilian IT department that employs today 1,500 people here in Brazil was ranked the best. So that was one of the reasons why Brazil was chosen for the Global Technology Center that we set out outside of Asia. Curitiba also was chosen in part to the fact that we have the headquarters of the HSBC Brazil are in Curitiba. So it's a city which is 400 kilometers south of São Paulo. You have very good universities here. Curitiba is also considered one of the best cities to live in Brazil, so the quality of life is very, very good. So that helps attract people from outside of Curitiba to come and work in Curitiba. And the infrastructure is very, very good. And we also have a very strong partnership with the city government that has given us tax rates to help us finance the setup. So there are many good factors that explain why we're in Brazil and why we're in Curitiba.
Thank you, Jacques. So look at this slide that we're seeing. We'll see that when you look at a city after you have selected the country, the first criteria for actually filtering is, okay, overall connectivity. And connectivity from the infrastructure standpoint and from the get-to point. Where are many flights available? Can you get in and out easily? So that's the first criteria you look at. Second thing, you're moving down into what's the overall labor availability within that city. And once you've seen that there's availability, you go down to the third stage, and you want to look at what are the specific skills that they have tied into BPO, ITO, and development. And then you're going to look into the cost analysis to actually come down to the cost competitive cities. Moving on to the next slide, Katie. Yes. So here is where you're going to, after you've defined the cities that have been actually filtered in the process before, you're going to start working with your team on the ground, and they're going to be now really looking at real estate and building options and costs. They're going to be looking at who are the leaders in the region that we need to reach out. What are the qualification and costs for human resources locally, and what is the overall package that we can try to build to then into a negotiation phase. Package meaning what type of incentives that you're going to look for, what type of public policy commitments you're going to look for. Every city now around the world is looking to attract high-tech capabilities. They understand that is where it keeps them green, and it also gives them a greater economic development. Moving to the next slide, Katie. And to the audience, we're going to make this PowerPoint presentation available to all. So if you miss something right now, you'll be able to go back once you get the presentation, and we'll be available over email to answer any questions you may have. So when you go into the phase 4, which is the final selection and negotiation, you're really looking into sitting down with the government representatives. You're looking to sitting down with the colleges and universities. You're looking to sit down with the key associations that are on the ground. You're looking to build an entire puzzle in which you can then define which brings the best value proposition to what the project that you have, to the goals of your global delivery center. And I'd like to jog the comment real fast and how integrated all these factors of government, college, universities, and specific development organizations are tied in to Curitiba.
Okay, I'd like to comment first that I think there has been a big change in Brazil in the last 3 to 4 years. Because before, the IT industry in Brazil is very, very mature. There are more than 1.7 million people working in IT in Brazil. But Brazilian companies have never looked to offshore because the internal market is so big that they felt the need. And that's why now they're trying to look outside and try to attract people. So for me, it's a very well-kept secret. You have very good IT professionals here, but that we're working exclusively for local projects. And that's why the government is trying to attract foreign companies to set up offshore centers, and a lot of cities see that as one of their priorities. So if you look at Curitiba, Curitiba is really focused on becoming a hub for international companies that want to set up offshores. And they're trying to create good incentives that will make it easier for these companies to come and set up an operation. You also have a very active participation of the different IT companies in the city as well as the universities. So they're really working together to start developing more professionals in order to meet that future demand. Okay?
Okay, very good. We are already moving on forward, and we have a fourth polling question. What are the principal certifications or best practices frameworks your current projects require? And we'd like to answer that. We will, while you're answering, we will showcase you real fast the tables that are normally used for the selection process criteria. And at the end, we would like to make it just a final question on your country destination selection process that you currently have in place. And reminding you again that we will have this presentation available for you so you can look into greater detail. Okay, thank you, Katie. So if you can move on to slide 29. So here you have a table, and these tables are which are the ones that are used for first coming down with the city selection, country selection, then city selection, in which you're taking labor competition issues into consideration. You're taking the infrastructure that those particular locations have. And you even look at, for instance, what are the peak hours for commute, and what is the distance that people have to commute back and forth to work, travel accessibility. Moving on to slide number 30, Katie, we'll see that then we also have the real estate issues in which you want to look at. And then moving to slide 31, you will see that you also have incentives and the quality of life. If we move to the latter slide, Katie, and I'm talking about slide 34. Yeah, this is where you look at, after having all those criteria analyzed, the 3 different country city destinations comparison. So you're looking at 3 different cities from 3 different countries. So you have Curitiba, Mexico City, and Buenos Aires. So your first set of filters is the one that we have talked about, where you're looking at political stability, looking at security, looking at risk of natural hazards. Once you've gone through that filter, you go to the second filter, looking at connectivity and infrastructure support. Connectivity being, can I get in and out there easily? There are many flights going into that region. And an infrastructure report is the actual connectivity from telecommunication standpoint, and also the overall infrastructure as far as development, economic development. And then you go into your main findings, which are all those other criteria that we have discussed. If you move on to slide 35, Katie, we'll see now that once you look into a same country, 3 different cities, and we're looking at Brazil, and look at Curitiba, Porto Alegre, and Recife, which are known destinations within Brazil, and then you're looking at what are the specific packages from the incentive standpoint, union relationships, labor qualifications of those 3 different cities. And you want really to be able here to package or to showcase which cities are going to be able to offer you the best attractiveness, the best package deal as far as incentives are concerned, as far as real estate, as far as public policy commitments that are required. I think that we want to leave a little bit more time for some questions. We have a last polling question, number 5. Katie, if you could put that up, please.
To which nearshore countries is your company likely to outsource in the near future? Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, Chile, or Costa Rica?
Well, while people are taking time to answer, I want to go ahead and thank everyone. I want to thank the audience for being and taking the time to listen to us. I want to thank Jacques DePolka for taking the time from Curitiba and bringing value to this webinar. Frank, you're the greatest host ever. I have to learn a lot from you and how to handle better these webinars. And Katie, you are a great support too. I want to thank you as well.
Thank you for the feedback, Robert and Jacques. Thank you for sharing your story. There's nothing more valuable than hearing from someone who's actually living the experience from a practitioner standpoint. And as I said just before this call, as we were prepping for this call, I was looking forward to not only hosting it but also learning from it. And I did indeed learn several new things that will be of value to us, and we will make sure we communicate to our members. Also, once again, Robert, thank you for supporting us, and not only by way of this webinar and future webinars, but by way of gatherings that we will have together. There's a significant amount of interest, as you are all well aware, in nearshoring, and Brazil is constantly making the headlines as far as a star in that part of the world. And based on many of the things we covered today, it's becoming more and more apparent why Brazil is indeed getting that attention. Jacques, any parting comments that you'd want to make?
Yes, I was just looking at the results of the last polling question, and I think Mexico is always on the front, but I think I have the experience of working a lot with Mexico, and I consider the IT professionals in Brazil a lot better than the ones in Mexico. So I think I work closely with the IT in Mexico, and we're doing projects for them. And if I had to compare choose between Mexico and Brazil, I would choose Brazil, without any hesitation. I saw that Argentina is in second place in the poll. Argentina today is going through a crisis. The situation there is very, very bad, and also the labor market in Argentina is very small. If you look at Brazil, it's 196 million people. Argentina has 30 million people, so it's harder to find good IT professionals in Argentina than it is to find in Brazil. And I've spoken to companies like EDS that have an operation there. They're having trouble filling up all the available positions that they have in Argentina because there's no local IT labor market. That's all.
Thank you very much.
I guess, so this is Frank again. Stepping back, thinking, big picture, if you will. The good news is, if you're a existing or would-be outsourcing client, / practitioner, there's never been more options. And in many cases, what I'm finding is that it's less of a, should we go to this destination versus that. It's more of, should someone diversify their portfolio? There are still people that are wrestling with that. I think if you speak